Everyone must be familiar with the yin and yang. It serves as a clear example of how everything in life is codependent. It shows balance. Everything in life needs balance. When the balance of the world is disrupted, the true chaos begins. In this case, the chaos is UBI, a standard payment for all, no matter who you are. But here's an important question. Does Bill Gates or Elon Musk need an extra $1,000 a month? No, it's not a need.
Yeah, I see it.
Nor is it a priority.
They heard
Food,
my voice.
Water, clothes, shelter, healthcare, education. These are needs. The simple alternative to UBI is to supply necessities or infrastructure or even means-tested benefits. Will every citizen of a country have access to UBI? If you say yes, are you suggesting that corrupt government officials don't exist? What if UBI is used as political propaganda to bait voters of lower annual income to vote for a specific political candidate? Furthermore, the government supplies security benefits to the society. With the implementation of UBI, there will be a cut on the benefits provided. Governments will remove the subsidy provided on many goods, and funds are limited. Government funds are limited. Let me repeat that. Let us look at a hypothetical village in Africa. The people do not really need $1,000 or some equivalent compensation here. They need infrastructure, clean water, bathrooms, toilet, proper houses. A fixed monthly income is not going to cause major changes here because there is nothing the people can do individually to change their lives. Let us say that country X has a population of 300 million people and decides to give every adult $1,000 a month. Every year, that qualifies as a federal expense and not as development costs. This hefty sum of money could have been used to improve the infrastructure. You will be adding $3.6 trillion of debt to your country's name every year. Plus, which government is rich enough to fund this in the longer run? People will become richer month after month, and the demand for various products will increase simply because people can afford more goods now. The demand increases, but the supply decreases. The supply chain gets affected. In many countries, the amount of labor willing to work has decreased as people are getting benefits without working. This affects the supply of factors of production. The cascading effect is the shortage of aggregate supply, which will lead to inflationary trends, which will then just be more debt, all because the supply is not able to keep up with the demand. The economy will plunge into recession. The country will just have more debt and debt that they cannot deal with. By definition, a smaller labor force would mean lower economic output and lower tax revenues to invest in the future. Countries already have progressive taxing in place. The rich pay more and the poor pay less. Is UBI the only solution to problems? Fixing infrastructure like public schooling systems in countries like India and medical facilities in Africa will directly affect the country by creating more jobs, less risks for economic recessions, and prevent an increase in debt. The motivation behind most universal basic income proposals is admirable: reduce widespread poverty and supply lifelong income security to all. But a UBI would fall short of ending poverty while imposing large economic costs and ignoring future compensations for work. It also ignores that life is rooted in a civic tradition of
sorry.
73% of humans, according to Forbes, believe working hard is very important to getting ahead in life. Money by itself serves as a tremendous motivating factor, and it's always said that work earns you instant respect and salary a month later. UBI may make the people complacent. It is always said that money is the reward of hard work. Investment in infrastructure leading to the creation of jobs is a better choice than just giving minimum amount to the poor to eradicate poverty.
Okay. So I'm going to continue where Arjun left off. So if you break UBI into three words, okay. Do I stop?
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. So UBI, if you break it down into three parts, you're left with universal basic income, and there's a problem with all three of these words. Let's begin with basic and where Arjun left off. UBI as a system relies entirely on the initiative of the individual. The older generations or more financially unstable individuals are rendered unqualified to join the quaternary sector due to their inexperience with technology. But once they receive UBI, they may simply pick up part time jobs, their basic living costs fulfilled, giving them no reason to rejoin the workforce entirely. Now, UBI might give impoverished children better education, leading them to better white collar jobs in the future. But it does not take account for the world's current workforce, the majority of whom hold jobs that will be taken over by technology. What inspires the current workforce to invest the time and money into learning new skill sets that might secure them jobs in the quaternary sector? All that putting in a basic income does is propagate an entitlement mentality and destructive behavior with the knowledge that you will get paid no matter what. This also means that as the people who are getting UBI and use it as basic income would not rejoin the workplace into the
Your
quaternary
time is
sector.
over. You can finish your point.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which
Thank you. Your time is elapsed. If anyone has any questions, they can raise their hands. Sampada, followed by Tejas. Sampada, you can speak first.
Yeah. So, how does the speaker talks about political propaganda. How is UBI a tool of political propaganda if all people are getting equal money?
Thank you. Speakers, you may answer.
My clear point was that political propaganda, UBI can be used as political propaganda to bait voters into getting votes. You can use UBI as part of your campaign to win an election. There is no say that you will deliver your promise because you don't have the money. No government has the money.
Okay. Thank you. Tejas, your question.
Moderator, I have two short questions. Can I be recognized for both, or will I be given only one?
No, just ask one. Whichever you feel is more relevant.
Okay. Speaker, I'd like to ask you a hypothetical question. Suppose there exists a country, a society, in which there is a minority that is heavily persecuted. The entire society dislikes the minority, be it the government, be it the individuals, be it the opposition party. If there is no universal basic income, it is very likely that this minority will be persecuted economically as well. There might not be welfare schemes or social security nets that would help bring this minority. In
Keep it as
fact,
a
this
question.
minority might be suppressed more and alienated. Do you believe that a universal basic income can fix this hypothetical situation? And how?
Speakers, you may answer.
so so you bring up a valid point where universal basic income works on the basic rules of human equality. However, the problem becomes that this is a minority. There is also a majority, and there is, in addition to that majority, there are the privileged who, when we use UBI on them, um, it doesn't work out because it doesn't become essential funds for them. It becomes disposable funds for them, and we're wasting money on the privileged who don't need these funds. So in order to combat this, we should actually come up with specified programs that run on grounds of human equality instead of just creating a generalized one fits all program, which will just cause the wasting of money.
Okay. Thank you. Aryan, your question.
Yes, so you talk about how corruption is going to be basically leading to the downfall of UBI itself, but isn't corruption a constant on either side of this debate? Because corruption can come even in the current welfare state, and it can come even in a UBI state itself. So wouldn't that basically mean that you're trying to use corruption to justify a problem which is there either on your side itself as well?
Okay. Speakers, you can answer.
Okay. You talk about
on
corruption.
your side itself.
Let me ask you this: what
Speakers, you can
is
answer.
the use? What is the need of UBI? You want to make a universal basic
You talk about
income,
corruption,
which
itself.
basically
Let me
ask you helps this: the lower income, like people who have lower income. What is the need of UBI? Now, you want to make that corruption universal basic income, which basically ask you this: the lower income, like people who have lower income. What is the need of UBI? Now, you want to create a source of payment for the poor, but the government officials don't let the money get to the poor. But it only goes to universal basic income. That's the point of UBI.
Okay, thank you. I'll entertain one more. Akash, a short question.
Yeah, thank you. You said that it'll cost in a hypothetical situation, it'll cost $3.6 trillion, but isn't that a basic calculation without taking into factor what will go out, which will come in for UBI, like other welfare schemes? Because of that, won't the cost for UBI go drastically lower than 3.6 trillion, but may come in the hundreds of billions?
Because
So, just to ask you to elaborate, are you asking for the amount that other welfare programs will take out of government funds in addition to UBI?
No, what I meant was you said 3 point.
hold up, no crosstalk. You have
Sorry,
to
sorry.
recognize me to be and speakers. You can't ask a question back to the person who asked the question. So, anyways, your time is lapsed for this. I think you made your point. We'll move on to the next speaker. The next speaker, Sampada, since your camera is working, we will recognize Sampada and Omkar speaking for the topic of universal basic income. Your time
Um,
starts now.
Thank you.
yeah. So we live in a world where 1% of the richest own twice as much as the bottom 90%. A world where 50% of jobs are going to be lost to automation and millions more due to the pandemic. A world where UBI is the best approach to providing aid. We propose three things in this speech. Firstly, I'll talk a little bit about how we're framing this debate. Second, some major arguments. And third, some preemptive rebuttals. First, on how we define UBI. UBI basically has three characteristics. It's universal, it's unconditional, and it's direct. So it doesn't involve any middlemen or uh, like in the beneficiaries in the process. So the whole argument that we heard from side opposition about corruption goes out of the window, which, as we pointed out, exists on both sides of the house. Moving on to our major arguments. We have three major arguments in this speech. The first one is about how UBI will positively impact the loss of jobs that has been caused due to automation. So we know that 70% of jobs today are at a high risk of being replaced by automation. And these are mainly manual and semi-skilled labor. So UBI provides a safety net which allows these people to upskill and get jobs that cannot be easily replaced, involving things like creativity and entrepreneurship. Because inadvertently, on both sides of the house, there is going to be a restructuring of the way the current employment system works. And UBI is the best way to provide aid, since considering the magnitude of jobs that are going to be lost. On the second point about how, in the current scenario of the pandemic, UBI is a highly sustainable solution. Just ask yourself, in the current pandemic, have the highly paid and skilled doctors and software engineers lost their jobs? No. It is the poor manual laborers who are losing their jobs, and construction workers and so on. Why is UBI so beneficial? Is because it provides a safety net, a fast and no questions asked approach to providing aid. We need to help these workers get out of the situation as quickly as possible, and the UBI is a way to alleviate their condition and prevent them from slipping through the gaps of the bureaucracy. On the third point about social benefits of the UBI. So what happens when people don't earn enough without a UBI system? They drop out of education, they turn to crime, and their work just isn't productive enough. What we tell you on our side of the house is that the total cost of all the burdens that that side opposition talked about, the UBI basically pays for itself, because now we have people getting money to enroll their children in school, people disincentivized to commit crime. And there's data backing my claims. In 2010, researchers gave $200 to people in a Liberian slum. We're talking about a third world country over here. And they assumed that it would mainly be spent on things like gambling and alcohol. They were so surprised when over 1/3 of the residents spent on businesses, 90% improved security, and so on and so forth. And we even see in other third world countries like Namibia, where the enrollment ratio in schools, like the people who are dropping out of schools, dropped from 40% to 5%. And on a second point about the social benefits of UBI, we tell you that UBI is critical to escaping what is termed as wage slavery. So people are forced to earn a wage despite hating the job they're employed in. Now that UBI is paying for survival costs, they can turn towards things like creative pursuits, and it gives financial backup to be able to freely choose a job that they enjoy, increasing productivity and increasing output. And they also are now in a position to like force their employers to meet working standards, something they couldn't do if they were dependent on the employer to get food on their table. And the third and most important point is that there's no eligibility barrier for UBI. So there's no scope for exclusion errors. What we tell you is that at present, the government is excluding the people who need it the most in their process of trying to hone down on people who actually need the aid. And in the process, we're okay with some amount of inclusion errors, what we heard on side opposition, to the point at which the vast majority of poor people actually get the aid they deserve. And my partner will now be talking about the economy and how UBI helps in economic growth.
Thank you, Sampada. Now, touching upon what the economy has to gain by the implementation of the UBI, the most obvious benefit for the economy is that there will be an increase in aggregate demand. And as we know, economies survive on consumer spending. And also, with the implementation of a UBI, there will be a creation of favorable economic conditions for businesses. How? For one, people and banks will have more capital, and there will be an increased availability of credit. There will also be a net increase in investments in equity and debt securities because people have more money. As banks have more money, they will be able to lend at lower rates of interests. Thus, people and businesses have a wider range of access to credit and capital because they have increasing revenues, increasing investments, and a better availability of credit. And thus, several new businesses enter the market and existing ones grow to generate profit. On the whole, this will increase the real GDP, thus exhibiting the multiplier effect. Now, focusing on developing economies in particular, these economies are plagued with lack of spending in their economies, because people don't have money to spend. Thus, giving the people a universal basic income will set the economy running. And since people have money, there will be some emergence of cottage and small-scale industries, thus strengthening the domestic market. Additionally, one more further factor that encourages the coming up of new businesses is that the risk factor is alleviated, because if people, when they're considering starting a business, they know that even if their business fails, they will still have a UBI to ensure their basic needs. The growth of a domestic market makes countries less dependent on imports, and it sets them on the path to become an exporting country once their domestic economy has been strengthened enough to generate a surplus. Additionally, this claim is backed by empirical data.
Time is over. You can complete that point.
This claim is backed by empirical data, such as in Kenya, when a certain number of villages were provided with the UBI, there was a notable expansion in domestic business.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? You can raise your hands. Vivan, followed by Arjun. Vivan, you're recognized. You can speak.
Yes, sir. So you stated that if someone's business fails, they will know that they have a UBI to support them. So I know that some of the population might go ahead and become entrepreneurs, but what guarantee do you have that majority of the population will try and go for startups? Because as you said, they already have a UBI to live on and get their basic needs.
Thank you. Speakers, you may answer.
Okay, please note, first of all, when you say majority of the population will make startups, obviously there will be an increase in the amount of domestic business. That is the point, because obviously you can't have more than 50% of the population coming up with new businesses. There will be an increase in the number of businesses, and this in turn will generate employment. And with respect to your point that people already have their basic needs covered, please know that people work to improve their living standards, and this has been seen in recent experiments in developing countries with respect to UBI. So it's not that the labor market will collapse because of the provision of a UBI.
Okay, thank you. Arjun, your question?
Okay. Without major cost savings, federal tax revenue would have to be doubled, which would impose massive distortionary costs on the economy. A UBI cannot be financed with government debt or newly printed currency. How do you propose UBI will fund itself, and what are your sources and stats for that?
Okay, speakers, you may answer.
Yeah. Yeah, so what we're saying is that the social benefits are so great that you'll have increased enrollment in, firstly, you'll have increased, like reduced crime rate, increased enrollment in schools and stuff, which will obviously lead to a more educated and skilled workforce, which will contribute to the economy in future. Secondly, as Omkar already told you about how businesses are going to grow and they're going to employ people, obviously there's going to be, so basically UBI pays for itself because of the fact that it's generating the social benefits which enable people to contribute back to society, which is
Okay,
what we think. Yeah, that's
thank
it.
you. I think you're repeating yourself, so try to keep it shorter. Um, Anirudh. Anirudh, do you have a question? Okay, Aryan, your question.
Right. So my question is that they talk about how automation is going to be replacing jobs, etc. But don't you realize if people go back to their jobs after and keep for a long time outside the labor market, since there's a technological evolution, the technical skills required for jobs in the market will change, which will basically mean that if you go back to some sort of enforced leisure, you're not going to be getting back to the labor market anytime soon. So how are you going to ensure that you can actually fund your UBI if people aren't working?
Speakers?
Yeah, we think that the capital that's going into the people's pocket is going to be used in a majority of cases for them to upskill, and to the point at which 70% of the workforce is going to be laid off. We think that the significant upskilling will help them rejoin the labor market in future.
Okay,
And
thank you. We're going to move on. The next speaker is Akash and Archit, who will be speaking for the topic. Akash and Archit, where are you?
Yeah, so am I audible?
Yeah, sure. Your time starts now.
Okay. So first, let's start with what is universal basic income. It's basically a universal system where everyone is paid a fixed sum periodically to lessen poverty, hunger, and eventually replace existing welfare programs. While many believe that it is impractical to implement such a system simply due to the sheer cost, the reality is that the real cost of implementing such a system would not be as high as many people think. Since it would replace several existing systems and moreover encourages and is very much seen to cause small scale businesses to rise, a lot more money through taxes will flow back to the government simply due to the rise in purchase of goods and the employment of more people. A very important point to note here is also that with a significant rise in AI and automation, a huge number of jobs will be removed, and it is impractical to expect middle aged working class members to immediately reinvent themselves by becoming computer engineers or program developers and other such jobs, which will require a significant education, especially compared to their previous jobs. Take, for example, drivers, or better yet, take, for example, someone who works in a retail store. Their jobs are being replaced as of right now, too, due to the presence of large conglomerates like Amazon. It's difficult to expect them to shift occupations almost instantaneously from their current one, which require almost no education, to an occupation like computer engineering, which requires much higher education. A UBI system would ensure their survival while they try to reinvent themselves or explore new ideas. A UBI system would also be universal, which means that the government won't need to spend time and resources on identifying the population which would come under this system, since it will be provided to everyone in the country. Here we can consider the system of ration shops which are practiced in India. The government is required to identify families below the poverty line, maintain ration shops, and ensure that the owners of these shops do not take part in practices like hoarding of grains, etc. If a universal basic income system is introduced, there won't be a need to maintain other welfare systems like these, and will also be much simpler to execute. This means that while it would be more expensive than the current existing scheme, it would be easier to implement. Further, this system provides the money not to a household, but to every person. A very important and significant advantage of this is that it reduces or it could reduce the number of domestic abuse cases As in many cases, people who are being abused continue to remain in the same household as they have nowhere else to go and no other way to support themselves. They're forced to be in the same household because of the lack of an alternative. A universal basic income would solve that problem, as if they have their own income, they can afford to go somewhere else and look for better places to be. A system like UBI, which is universal in nature, would not only help the lowest strata of society, but also the middle class families, who can then easily and better afford services like healthcare, education, and can then expand beyond that by starting up their own businesses. This means that introducing such a system would boost the purchasing power of the country, meaning more people would be able to follow more hobbies and even if not start a business, become more productive as their happiness would increase. A UBI system would also reduce crime by a significant factor. A large number of people who commit crimes are often driven to do so by a lack of money, especially petty crimes like thefts, robberies, and holdups. If they get a UBI to ensure their survival, they won't need to rely on thefts and other such crimes to sustain themselves.
Thank you. I'll continue from where my partner left off. Three things UBI will improve: a person's happiness, a person's innovativeness, and his productiveness. He can be happy as he can do what he really likes, what he actually likes, and what he wants to do in life. Secondly, because he gets a basic income, he can innovate, do something new, and help contribute to the economy. And thus, UBI is the best. And also productiveness. As they man, woman, and child. The idea of UBED is such that it does not discriminate against people on the basis of religion, caste, or gender. By providing UBI, it genuinely, I repeat, genuinely motivates people to do something that they really want to. Thus, they do anything wholeheartedly. It also gives them more time to spend with the family and may even pursue higher education as they have a little bit of extra money. And they may even work part-time jobs because they might want to spend more time with their parents or children. In a way, UBA also acknowledges the work done by people who do social activities or do work like the homemaker or our mother does at home, for which there's no monetary gain, but just love. On account of the coronavirus crisis, the debate for UBI has got a lot of strength now. And people are saying that if there was a UBI, the crisis would have been better and it could have been handled way better. So in Uganda, based on a random experiment of 535 people, a grant was given and job opportunities grew and people started their own business, showing that even in developing countries, UBI works. Also, for UBI, there's support across the ideological spectrum, so it won't be too controversial on that end. To conclude, even if the time for implementing UBI is not ripe, according to some people, the time is genuinely ripe to discuss or debate about it seriously. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We'll move on to questions. Um, Ishan, followed by Mahe. Ishan, you can ask your question.
Right. So the speaker mentioned that he believed that since UBI would leave people with more free time and money, they would pursue more innovation and creativity. But for example, in the USA, we have around 40 million Americans collecting some form of disability checks or disability payments. And since these rates were ramped up, we've seen literally no scope for new innovation, not too much more innovation or too much more creativity or endeavors from these people who have the free time and the resources that you're talking about and claim will somehow jumpstart innovation. So we have evidence to prove that this isn't true at all. So how would you like to rebut that?
Okay, so we have seen that the people who are disabled are kind of depressed, like they're sad, and plus they're living paycheck to paycheck because they have huge hospital bills. But by giving them a universal basic income, they can do something. That's because you can't compare with what has happened with what will happen. We believe, and there has been significant evidence, which I will provide, that after giving UBI, a disabled person can do something better and can innovate and do something in their field because they cannot do some things which other people can. But it is surely seen that with this extra amount of income, they will be able to do something different and do something they really like and they're passionate about.
Okay.
Actually, you can add on if you want.
Thank you.
I'm assuming I can't follow up with that.
No follow-ups.
Okay, thank you.
Mahe Banerjee.
Yes. So you
turn your
stated,
camera on if you don't mind.
sorry.
Also, when you ask a question, please try to state what the other person says and then ask just a one-line question. Don't try to give your own point of view. You have the rebuttal round for that. Yes, Mahit.
Okay. So you stated that with UBI, people are freer to pursue a field in which they are, they're passionate about, and therefore they're happier, right? So if you were to take a field like liberal arts, and UBI encourages more people to pursue the liberal arts in as opposed to like an engineering job, then what happens to the gap in the engineering sector? Who takes on those jobs which people don't like doing?
Okay, thank you, speakers. Akash, you're muted. Akash, you are muted. We can't hear you. Ishan, Archit, do you want to answer the question? Akash, you have to unmute.
Yeah, sure. So, what we believe is that this gap which will exist, like, see, there's a huge workforce right now which will lose their jobs over the next few years due to automation and everything else. So, there's a huge workforce available right now, and a majority of these people will be forced to go into the computer sector or an IT sector. And so, even if there is a decrease in the number of people who aren't passionate about it, like you mentioned, there will be enough people ready from the workforce which exists right now to take over. And what the UBI does is it basically eases that transition between a non-educated job and an educated job.
Okay, thank you. I think that's clear. Tejas, your question?
Speaker, may I be allowed two questions, please?
No, we don't have time for that. One short question.
Okay. Sorry, that was addressed to the moderator. Speaker, you spoke about education, social security nets, and I think with special regard to computer science education and how universal basic income might help people get higher education that is more relevant for jobs that are arising today as a side effect of automation in the economy. This seems like a rather targeted program to me. To me, it appears as though you are providing a service to a specific group of people who need it. Would you not agree that directly providing them the service by either subsidizing or making education free would be more effective and transparent than paying them and expecting them to spend 100% of that fund without doubt, certainly on their own education?
I think the question is clear, speaker.
Okay, yeah. So what I mentioned was that in the UBI system would help ease the transition between what they are right now and what they will become. You cannot expect someone who's on a minimum wage and that job which might be gone soon to continue living in a society and just provide him with education and expect him to survive for the next 4 or how many ever years it might take him to become skilled in that field. So you cannot expect him to directly become an expert in the field while he doesn't have a basic need for food, a basic need for shelter, and everything else. What the UBI does it is basically eases the transition, like I mentioned before. It provides them and maintains this survivability in that transition phase from a non-educated job to an educated one.
Okay, thank you. We're gonna move on because we don't have time. The next speaker is Tejas Deshpande, and he is speaking again. Tejas, if you're ready, your time starts now.
Just give me 1 second, please. I have to.
Sure.
Okay, my his screen's loading. All right. Um, am I audible and may I begin?
Yeah, sure. I'm starting your time.
Good morning. I negate the resolution of the House on 3 counts. Firstly, that UBI will lead to an artificial scarcity in labor markets. Secondly, that UBI is ineffective as its usage is not regulated and UBI is not targeted aid. Thirdly, that UBI is not financially and economically sustainable. I will now proceed to make my first contention. UBI will lead to artificial scarcity in labor markets. If we pay people less unconditionally to do nothing, they will do nothing, and this leads to less effective economies, says Dr. Charles Wiplows, professor of international economics at the Graduate Institute in Geneva. Economist Dr. Alison Schrager says that a strong economy relies on people being motivated to work hard, and in order to motivate these people, there needs to be a sense of uncertainty in the future. UBI, providing guaranteed unconditional security, removes this uncertainty. Due to UBI, is there really any incentive for labor to work more that can arise from outside the already disproven rational consumer model? Workers might retire early or choose to work less. Recent studies suggest that only a weak link exists between UBI and joblessness. An analysis by researchers at MIT and Harvard found that cash transfer programs in the developing world had little to no recognizable impact on employment behavior. In fact, with an increase in unemployment, there is a decrease in tax collections, which makes funding the UBI even harder. Existing safety nets, unlike the UBI, ensures that no one starves, freezes, or dies on the steps of a hospital, but it does not replace completely employment. This is why the UBI is not sustainable, but social safety nets are. This brings me to my second contention. The UBI is ineffective as its usage is not regulated and as UBI is not targeted aid. Social safety nets are targeted at specific groups of people, are adaptable and need-based. Unlike nets, UBI cannot fluctuate to meet varying social welfare needs. Social safety nets have proven to lift millions of people out of poverty every year. 36% of the world's very poor, according to the World Bank. Why replace this excellent system with something that has not yet proven to work on a large scale? Quite obviously, UBI comes at a partial, if not an absolute cost of existing targeted benefit programs. UBI takes more money from the rich that is intended for the poor and distributes it amongst everyone. What this means is to finance the UBI for those who do not need it, we are taking away aid from those who need it the most. UBI is a cash payment. There is no possible way to monitor what it is being spent on. Citizens could use all of their UBI on demerit goods. Unlike free or subsidized services, governments cannot guarantee social welfare through UBI. While governmental programs like education, vocational training, and healthcare are sure to improve the Human Development Index, simply paying unemployed citizens and expecting them to maximize their benefit is irrational. Researchers from the Federal Bank of St. Louis found that unemployment insurance beat UBI in terms of effectiveness as it is better targeted to those in need. On to my third contention. UBI is not financially and economically sustainable. UBI advocates observe that the existing safety net in any developed nation spends on each person roughly what a livable basic income would cost, but it does this for only a small subset of the population for whom benefits phase out quickly as their incomes rise. A UBI limited to the budget of the existing safety net could therefore offer a small benefit to everyone or a large benefit to everyone, but one that phases out quickly, but not both. And a UBI that offers a large benefit to everyone would require a massive budget increase. A UBI could perform better than existing safety nets only by costing dramatically more. But then again, so safety nets would cost better if they had all that extra cash. The UBI can be financed in three ways: money printing, deficit spending, or taxes. And all three of these are not sustainable. Basic economic theory dictates that money printing against no real production leads to demand pull inflation in the economy. This would lead to workers' wages being valued even lower than in a pre-UBI world. Coupled with the participation in the workforce actually decreasing, this inflation would be compounded and even more detrimental for the country. You can take the example of Iran, where inflation rose to 35% in 3 years. Deficit spending within a country is when a country borrows from its rich to aid its poor. As the aid given in UBI is liquid, its usage cannot be tracked. In fact, a possibility that it would be solely used for social welfare is close to zero. Thus, we cannot say with certainty that the economy will grow. Hence, it is very likely that the country's poor will not be able to return the deficit they borrowed. This leaves the rich hurt and the market injured. The last way that could be used to fund the UBI would be by arbitrarily increasing taxes. However, that is unsustainable as well. An increase in taxes will lead to equilibrium quantity sold for a good decreasing rapidly. Producers are stripped of incentive to produce in or for a market with UBI. Even if producers continued production, prices would rise high, thus hurting consumers. In conclusion, my second contention, that is the ineffective reach of the UBI and its untraceability, prove that UBI cannot replace existing social security nets. My first contention proves that there will be a surplus of skill and labor in labor markets. My third contention, economic unsustainability, establishes that to run UBI in parallel to the decreased safety nets, which is the only way left, calls for a significant increase in tax, which again is unsustainable. Therefore, UBI is not financially sustainable. It is not the best approach to help those directly in need. UBI causes unnecessary transactions by paying money to rich people and then having it taxed again. UBI usage should not be monitored. And for all these reasons, I negate the resolution of the House. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Omkar, you can speak.
Okay. Thank you, moderator. So the speaker stated that there is no way to regulate the usage of the UBI, and you don't know how much of it is going into social welfare. I would like to ask, don't you think that the people will spend it on what they think will be best for them, rather than the government spending on rather than the government was spending on welfare programs, which will be sort of like a one size fits all?
Okay, thank you. You may answer that.
Speaker, I really disagree with you. I believe people will spend the money on whatever they want. If they are drug addicts, alcohol addicts, gambling addicts, or maybe even misinformed, there is a very high chance they will not spend the money optimally on maximum benefit in the long run from a society's point of view. Therefore, I disagree that citizens will use UBI exactly as a government would do solely to get them benefits.
I'm assuming a follow up won't be entertained.
No, follow-ups will not be entertained. Omkar, is my voice fine, by the way, or is it low?
Your voice is fine, but there was a certain problem with Akash. His voice, I couldn't hear him the entire time. Is that only my problem?
No, no. I just someone told me it was soft. But okay, Akash, you had a question. You can go ahead and ask it.
Yeah, the speaker said, and I quote, the current welfare schemes will bring millions above poverty, but UBI completely removes poverty. So don't you think it's better? Don't you think UBI is better?
Speaker, you can answer that.
Speaker, I think the following sentence after what you quoted in my argument was that there is no sustainable example of UBI running on a large scale in the long term yet, which is why I said that I propose we not replace our existing successful system with something that hasn't proven to work on the long run in the large scale.
Okay. Thank you, Anirudh. Do you have a question? Anirudh, you have your hand raised. Okay. Well, come back to Anirudh.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, you can ask your question.
Yeah, could the speaker prove that people wouldn't be spending the UBI on the things the government would expect them to use it on, rather spending it on whatever they would like to? As he mentioned, a few to be specific, drug addicts, alcoholics, fine. But how would you prove this?
Okay. I think he's asking you to substantiate that claim which you made. You can answer that.
Okay, I'd like to substantiate based on 2 points. Firstly, I can send you an example about the Alaskan UBI fund. Not sure if it's called exactly that, but it's an example really similar to UBI where citizens receive UBI payments, and studies have shown and empirical data also shows that not all of it was spent optimally. The same goes with Iran and the state of Seneca. I can send you links for all three examples. And secondly, very simply, what you are asking corresponds to what is known as the rational consumer theory. Time and again in economic history, rational consumer theory has been disproven. In essence, it has been disproven that humans will act with 100% optimal efficiency for their own personal benefit. Because humans have several cognitive biases and whatnot. Based on both of these contentions, I believe that they are not that all individuals are not capable of optimally spending UBI.
Okay. Thank you. We're going to move on to the next speaker. The next speaker is Vivan Khare, who will be speaking against the topic of UBI. Vivan, are you ready? You can turn your camera on.
Yeah,
Okay. I'm starting your 6 minutes now.
yeah. So, everyone, what do you think is the major cause for people to actually get a job and work? It is not for experience, nor is it for fun, but it is for being able to feed your family and live in good standards. The UBI, or Universal Basic Income as we know it, is a government program in which every adult citizen receives a set amount of money on a regular basis. Now, let's say if every citizen of a country gets a
It is
UBI
disproven.
of an amount of, let's
In
say,
essence, it has been
70,000
disproven
rupees
that humans will
at the
act with
beginning of
100%
every month.
optimal efficiency for
So
their
it
own
would be
personal benefit.
impossible to cope up with this demand for money with the debts of many countries. But even if a country did miraculously manage this, it would lead to many problems, such as rapidly decreasing demand for jobs, forcing many companies to eliminate the specific country from their focus list. This will also impact the economy heavily, as it already has many debts, as I have stated, and now is paying all of its citizens $1,000, which in India's case amounts to $12 trillion in a year. And this is not possible as the total GDP of India is six times lesser than $12 trillion. Uh, Also, the main reason most farmers work is for money. But if they are receiving a UBI of 70,000 rupees per month, 200 million farmers will have a rapid increase in their standards of living. Now, I'm not saying this is good, but most of them will stop working on the fields. And also, this amount cannot be reduced for them if they don't work because they need it the most. Even if they are told to work in exchange for the UBI as a bonus to their income, it would be impossible to monitor all 200 million farmers and poor people in remote areas of the country who are ignoring their duties and living off the UBI. Also, this will cause most hardworking farmers to take the burden of feeding a country of 1 billion people in the case of India. The government also can't threaten to take away the UBI of less privileged people, as all citizens are equal and they cannot put forward a condition only to the less privileged that if they do not work they will not get the UBI, and there is no way of monitoring whether each citizen of the country is working or not. And so for me, a permanent UBI could not be financed with the government, uh, and newly printed currency is another method that you can use, but it would require a lot of paper and many resources. Also, the only two countries to have implemented a UBI, Mongolia and Iran, gave up on this income system very shortly after it was implemented due to the reasons I have stated. But again, if there'll be many problems even if a country can afford UBI. For example, UBI doesn't target money to the most needy. So even as the farmers will be getting 70,000 rupees a month, even rich billionaires will be getting 70,000 rupees a month. And so the money will not only be going to the people that are extremely poor, but it will be increasing the wealth of people who are already extremely rich. Also, employers may pay lower wages because with the universal safety net, employers would have no incentive to increase wages beyond what is mandated by the government. This is likely to affect those in lower paying jobs more than the wealthiest. Therefore, I conclude the fact that UBI is not a good idea for a country, but at the same time, a good substitute of UBI is to only provide senior citizens with a minimal amount of money for them to live an above average life, as they can no longer earn money through working. This can be provided by companies paying small amounts of their income to the government while they are in the working age, and so that when they are retired, they will have an ample amount of savings to lead a very good life, and they will not face difficulties due to not being able to afford healthcare and medicines necessary to them.
Uh, Thank you, speaker. Will be entertaining questions. I'll start off with Archit. You can ask your question.
Oh yeah, thank you, moderator. Okay, so speaker, you mentioned how the presence of a UBI would cause the workforce to be less interested in labor and cause them to not do their jobs more often. But in the
Yes.
cases of Alaska, where they have been providing an income since 1982, there has been no loss in the labor force, but the poverty has been wiped out almost completely. It's also the similar case in Canada and Finland, where they had similar experiments, but never once did they report a significant loss in the amount of labor in the labor force. What do you have to say about that, Speaker?
As you have stated, they have conducted experiments. They have conducted They've conducted experiments and not implemented this permanently solely because they know that UBI cannot help in sustaining the economy. So in the case of Alaska, it might have worked out for a short time, Canada and France, but they have stopped the UBI because there were several problems with it.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm not allowed to follow up, right?
No follow-up.
Okay.
All participants, if you feel like you have a very relevant follow-up or a very relevant question, you can message it to me privately. But it should be quite relevant because I don't want to be spam. Okay, next question, Sampada.
Yeah, thank you, moderator. So the speaker mentioned that targeted programs would be more efficient, and I would like to ask the speaker, don't you think that the process of targeting the poor households, which the NSSO spends 90 lakhs every year doing, is more expensive than actually just providing the aid?
Speaker, you can answer.
Wait, can you please repeat the question? I had a lot of disturbance.
Sampada, could you repeat the question?
Yeah, sure. So you mentioned that targeted schemes would be far more efficient. So I just wanted to ask you whether the process of targeting people or finding out which people need it the most is more expensive than actually just providing the aid.
Did you understand the question, Speaker?
Yes, so you said that the poor households, so most poor households, if they have a working population, I mean, if their family members are of a working population, they can always go ahead and find jobs. And if they still are unable to find jobs, they can always take loans from banks, etc. And as you said, finding out who needs it more, uh, I think that it would not be more expensive than giving everyone a UBI, because in a country like India, as I said, it already has many debts, and giving everyone a UBI, let's say $1,000, would result in a debt of $12 trillion. So I don't think it will be more expensive.
Thank you, Speaker. Next question, Anirudh. Do you have a question? Anirudh?
Yeah, could you hear me?
Yeah.
I believe, yeah, I believe the
Can you
speaker
turn on your
mentioned
video?
that if farmers don't work on the fields, I mean, sorry, if the farmers receive a UBI, they wouldn't work on the fields. But wouldn't that pretty much disrupt the entire food chain because people themselves wouldn't get food? And then the speaker also mentioned that it wasn't good. So then why should they get the UBI in the first
Please keep
place?
it to one question. So, the first question, Vivan, did you understand that question?
No, can you please repeat it?
Anirudh, first question, can you repeat?
Sure. So the speaker mentioned that if farmers get a UBI, then they most probably wouldn't go to the fields to work out. But if they weren't working on the fields, then wouldn't it disrupt pretty much the entire food chain for the rest of the population?
Vivan?
So wasn't that my point? I said that it will destroy the food chain for most of the people if they get a UBI. So that's why I am against the UBI, and I don't want a UBI to come in place.
Okay, thank you, Speaker. We'll move on to the next speaker. Pradyot Bathuri. Pradyot, can you turn on your webcam?
Yeah,
Okay, sure. If you're ready to go, I'll start your time when you start speaking.
yeah, I'll start.
Pradyot, take over. Everyone. Sorry. Okay, sure. Go ahead.
Okay, I would like to start my speech by asking a couple of questions. First, if you had your breakfast, and the second being that if you're planning to have your lunch. My name's Pradyut Bathuri, and I'm speaking for the motion today. So, if your answer is yes for the first two questions, then you're one of the most fortunate people in the world, because more than 1 billion people in India or in the world are not able to have their breakfast or lunch or dinner in case for and have to starve the night. So UBI is because UBI can be implemented because we are first of all taxing only the rich, in mostly the rich, because the rich people have the most money and most of the taxation comes from them. So if we start implementing UBI, the rich people will be taxed more. And
Um, I think Pradyot left. I'm gonna guess that was because of connectivity issues. So, in the interest of not wasting time, we're gonna move on. I don't know why you all have your hands raised. Aryan, what?
No, it was from last time.
Okay, sure. If you all could just put your hands down between, like after I recognize the speakers for the question, that would be good. All right, moving on, we're going to go to Aryan Dikshit and Ishan Rai. Aryan and Ishan, can you turn on your cameras? Okay, they're on. I'll start your time when you start speaking.
Thank you, moderator. So I'm the first speaker from our team on the opposition side, and our burden is obviously to explain why we should not establish a UBI. I feel like the definition has already been stated, so I'm not going to go into that. I'll go right into why it's a bad idea. So, number one, universal basic income would raise inflation. So more people have more money, more people are spending, and they are spending on the same amount of goods, because since UBI doesn't directly incentivize or encourage labor, the supply doesn't necessarily increase. So the demand outweighs the supply, prices increase, and this is inflation. This is demand pull inflation, and for obvious reasons, it's pretty bad for the economy. So that is, I believe, I think the first point that I'd like to say. Uh, Past this, so the basically the economic survey model for a universal basic income, which is one of the most widely accepted models in India, at least for universal basic income, is predicated upon the Tendulkar poverty line, which stood at around rupees 7,620. Let's say, and so let's say the universal basic income under this system would be 8,000 rupees. 8,000 rupees across 12 months, that's around 600 rupees per month. Um, 600 rupees per month, and this would take up around 4.9% of India's GDP. Now, the fiscal space allotted for social welfare programs in India's GDP is around 5.1%. So essentially, to implement UBI and have it be economically feasible, you'd have to replace every single other social welfare program that exists in India. This includes um, this includes the NREGA, the SSA, LPG subsidy, Awas Yojana, Gram Sadak Yojana, ICDS, Swachh Bharat, midday meals, Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, and etc. So on and so forth. Now, for obvious reasons, this isn't feasible, because what you're essentially doing is you're substituting what could be a refined education, a proper education, for just 600 rupees a month. With Of course, the systems in India aren't completely perfect, but there have been noticeable improvements with, say, the government education system, the educational infrastructure, the medical infrastructure, and just general rural infrastructure as well. There have been noticeable improvements in all of these fields over the past 10 years, and they will keep on improving. So to substitute an education for just 600 rupees per month, around 600 rupees per month, it doesn't really make much sense at all, because what an education is doing is it's providing you with the qualifications, it's providing you with the knowledge and technical ability required to make it in the current job market. What universal basic income is doing is equipping you with enough money to buy maybe 2 sandwiches a week. Essentially, what happens with universal basic income is you don't know where this money is going. You don't know what people are going to spend this money on. Since it's a relatively small amount in India, since a relatively small amount is the amount that's feasible in India, it can't necessarily be used to purchase any substantial goods, or to be spent in a very substantial way. So people will defect and use it on things like drugs, on things like alcohol, and that obviously, for obvious reasons, that's a very big problem. You can't regulate the usage of this money. Therefore, targeted programs and targeted government spending is a lot more efficient and a lot more useful. Um, Essentially, it's like the social welfare programs for education, like the Sarva Shiksha Yojana, are essentially like on a potter's wheel, shaping the pot, making it a preferable and valuable product for the market, whereas a UBI is basically just throwing the clay on the pot and hoping it shapes up well. You don't know what this money is going to be spent on. You don't know if it's going to be spent well. There's no guarantee to it whatsoever, and it would not be feasible to implement the system at all. Coming to automation, now automation is a very strong point for the proposition. The proposition keeps bringing up automation, saying that automation would reduce the number of jobs. However, this is simply not true. Every single time these sorts of worries have come up, they have been debunked. I'd like to bring up the Industrial Revolution, for example. There were there were incessant beliefs that this would lead in the loss of several jobs, but as we see today, it's quite obvious and quite apparent that that is not at all the case. The proposition seems to believe that when certain jobs are automated, that those jobs are simply subtracted from the grand aggregate of unfilled jobs that we have in the country. But this isn't true. What actually happens is they are simply transferred to another market. So the jobs are still there, and this transfer doesn't necessarily happen in the span of one generation. It's a lot more gradual. So what would be a lot more helpful is preparing people for these transitions. And to prepare people for these transitions, we need an education system, we need an education system. We need educational infrastructure, medical infrastructure, and that cannot. India as a country cannot continue to progress along those lines if all of that is substituted for a measly 600 rupee paycheck per month. So in fact, not only does UBI not combat automation, it makes it should greaten the fear of automation, because UBI incentivizes unemployment. It incentivizes staying at home and not doing much. A lack of exposure to the job market reduces your technical ability and your actual scope to perform well in the job market. Over a longer period of time, this exponentially grows. And if there's an automation does not stop if UBI is implemented, it will happen anyway. And the best way to combat automation is prepare people for that automation through education, which UBI seeks to directly eliminate because it needs that space in the fiscal budget. It simply doesn't make sense. It's not at all feasible. I'd also like to talk about the fact that several people are bringing up innovation, saying that saying that UBI would give people time and resources, and they could hence pursue innovation and creativity. But as I mentioned once before, in the USA, there's millions of people collecting disability checks. They have this time and these resources, and there is no increased scope for innovation or creativity there. It's basic human nature, people. If something is, if I'm sorry.
Your time is over.
Okay, could I just wrap up?
I let you complete that point. We're a bit
Okay.
over time.
Okay, it's basic human nature for where the incentive for something drops, we don't pursue it, and I think we have to keep that in mind while considering UBI. Thank you.
Okay, Akash, you can ask your question.
Thank you, sir. The speaker, how would you suggest we fight job losses because of now the pandemic and later automation? Do you suggest a 50-year-old truck driver gets upskilled to become a software engineer? I mean, why will companies hire a 50-year-old truck driver with a skill certificate instead of a 25-year-old bright student out of college who has lower expectations and who's more flexible? So how will the transition take place for that person?
Right. So as I mentioned, this isn't some sort of overnight transition. It happens gradually, and the thing is, this transition will happen regardless of whether or not UBI is in place. So the way to combat this transition isn't to give people some measly amount of money that they can't live off of. The way to combat this transition is to prepare them for the transition, which can only be done through education, which cannot be pursued on a social welfare level if UBI is implemented.
Hello, Ishan, can you hear me speaking?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, so wait till I recognize you and then speak, okay?
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
It's all right, no problem. Vivan, you had a question? Vivan?
Yes, so the speaker stated that UBI will result in greater demand and lesser supply. So, don't you think that this will be better for the economy as with demand price increases?
Speaker, that is inflation. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Okay, Ishan, you can give your reply.
That is inflation. That is what inflation is. The UBI system doesn't necessarily incentivize greater labor. So that means supply will not increase, demand will increase, prices will rise. That is inflation. That is not favorable for the economy.
Okay, thank you. Well, next question, Tejas.
Hello, Speaker. You said that automation will not kill jobs now, as it did not in the Industrial Revolution. By saying that something is not possible now, as it did not happen in the past, is logically fallacious. This type of logical fallacy is called an appeal to ignorance. So my question to you is, how is your argument not fallacious?
Thank you, speaker. You can respond to that.
Okay,
Right. So
I'll take it on. Okay, so basically, when you look at the industrial revolution, you realize that it was the same sort of situation we have now. That automation, specifically spinning looms, were taking over the jobs of many weavers. But now, when you look at it in this context, you'll find out that it's a proven theory that whenever one job is lost in an economy, another one is created. That is clearly a part of what is known as the neoclassical synthesis of economics. And what basically takes place is that in the case that say horse carts go out of existence, that means that they've been replaced by something which is much more efficient, much more better, which is, for example, take a car. And the person who was probably repairing horse carts before might get a job repairing, say, engines, or repairing car wheels, because primarily because when as we were focusing on, if we do not have UBI, instead we focus on more constructive programs like education, we'll actually be essentially upskilling people, and that would essentially mean that we're actually going to be equipping them for meeting any sort of losses in jobs because of automation.
Okay, thank you, speaker. We're going to move on to the next speaker. Pradyot, is your connection fine?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Do you want to speak again? Should I start your time?
Yeah, I'll start from the beginning.
Sure, no problem. I'll start the time whenever you start speaking.
Okay. So my speech, yeah, I'll start now. Okay. So I would like to start by asking you two questions. First thing is, if you had your breakfast, and the second thing being that if you're planning to have your lunch. So my name's Pradyut Baturi, and I'm speaking for the motion. If the answer for the first two questions was yes, then you are one of the most fortunate people in the world. Uh, GDP is first because in this case we are taxing the rich more than the poor, and when we tax the rich, the poor will be benefited from the money which is exploited from the poor. So when the money reaches the poor, then they will be able to.
Mm, okay, I'm going to assume he has connectivity issues. We'll move on to Anirudh Chaturvedula. Anirudh,
Yeah, can you hear me?
hello. Yeah, do you mind turning your webcam on?
It is on.
It is on. Arjun, can you
Yeah.
see Anirudh's webcam?
No, I cannot.
No, you cannot. Anirudh, can you turn it on and off really quick?
Can you see me now?
No, I can't see it.
I don't know. I think it's on. I can see myself here.
We cannot
Is
see you, so can you please leave and rejoin?
Yeah, sure.
Well, wait for him. Mm. Also, a quick note to the participants, if anyone's wondering how I choose questions, I have a recognition sheet. So I'm just trying to make sure each team or each participant gets the same question. I see a lot of you putting the hand raising while the speech is going on, so it's not like first come, first serve or anything. Anirudh, is Anirudh back?
Uh, yeah. Can you see me now? My
Yes, I
camera
can
is
see you
on.
now, Anirudh.
Okay.
You can begin your speech. I'll start the timer when you start talking.
Basic income is not a utopia. It's a practical business plan for the next step of the human journey. Quote by Jeremy Rifkin. Good morning, honorable speaker and fellow debaters. Today, we gather here to understand why a universal basic income is necessary in today's world. I have two questions to ask you. First, how does the universal basic income plan work? And second, why do we need this plan? Second, for the first question, the plan is to give a fixed monthly deposit to each person aged 18 and above to help themselves and in return to improve the economy. This is really important as many rich countries claim that they don't have sufficient money to aid poorer countries, or else they make a bunch of agreements and pacts which eventually end up in garbage bags. Also, as poor countries have a huge population, the idea of a universal basic income would definitely help their people and make a significant contribution to the development of the country and the economy. For the second question, why do we need a universal basic income? Now, first of all, let's make it clear that anybody asking this question is against humanity and humanitarian principles itself. Are you trying to question the rights of a person? The basic rights of any person, taxes of food, clothes, shelter, and freedom. If that's the case, then I really don't believe words as to the extent of the cruelty of humans. All my fellow people who disagree with my point of view, I dare you all to spend just 72 hours in an underdeveloped nation, drinking water contaminated with bacteria and feces, wearing ripped clothes exposing the majority of your body, and being vulnerable to deadly insects, other deadly creatures, and feeling scared of attack from neighboring hostile tribes every single moment. I dare you all to have just two meals in those 72 hours and walk at least 25 kilometers. I dare you all to live in a hut made from steel shed coverings and dealing with a flooded house when it rains. I dare you all to experience dropping out of school by fifth grade and not having any education, apart from learning your numbers, the English alphabet, and not knowing knowing your mother tongue. And for the icing on the cake, I dare you all to go into a period of slavery in the most rural parts of the country without ever being free. Maybe experiencing all of this will make you understand why the world needs the UBI. The rich keep getting richer while the poor keep getting poorer. There's literally no equality in this world, and if the world should become a better place for humanity's greater good, then the contribution of every single human being will be vital and necessary. If every single human being should be able to contribute to this purpose, they should be educated, fearless enough to openly express their viewpoints and ideas, healthy enough to survive an entire life, and everyone should have dignity which can never be taken from them. For all of this to happen, the poor need to be able to afford these costs. For them to be able to afford these costs, a UBI is necessary. I am sure that for a person to live a comfortable life, they don't need mansions and palaces for themselves all around the world. I believe that they don't need a convoy of vehicles for themselves, a fleet of personal aircraft and attendants. Therefore, each ultra rich person should be able to donate a certain amount of their wealth for the cause of the poor. From a study by the WorldCounts.com website, around 9 million people die every year of hunger and hunger-related diseases. This is more than from AIDS, malaria, and tuberculosis combined. A child dies from hunger every 10 seconds. Poor nutrition and hunger is responsible for the death of 3.1 million children a year. That's nearly half of all the deaths in children under the age of 5. The children die because their bodies lack basic nutrients. Globally, 822 million people suffer from undernourishment. Should all of these continue without UBI, or should we help them with UBI? So, my fellow citizens of the world, let us join our hands together in making the world a safer, more equal, more fair, and better place for the world. As Maximilian Casey truly said, UBI would give more to those who need it, would promote liberty, and would politically be viable and stable. Thank you.
Thank you. Arjun, are you there?
Yeah,
Did he conclude or did he get disconnected? I
we
didn't
just
hear the last.
disconnected.
Just disconnected. Okay, I mean, he was. Anirudh, did you conclude or did you get disconnected?
I think I concluded, right?
All right, sure. My internet just spazzed out a bit there. Any questions? I'm going to recognize. Mm, Akash, you can ask your question.
No, sir, by mistake I raised my hand. My hand wasn't raised, I guess. I don't have a
All right,
question.
no problem. Mm, Tejas, you can ask your question.
Okay. Thank you for the recognition. Speaker, see, you propagate a theory known as socialism, wherein you take money from the rich and give it to the poor solely because they're poor, instead of making a capitalist investment in the poor so that they no longer are poor. Now, the way you back your theory for the need of socialism is solely a moral obligation. Do you really think such a moral obligation is sufficient for people who have worked hard and made money to give that money back to poor people who simply have not?
So, Speaker, I believe you're trying to say that that people who've worked hard, that in a world population of around 7 billion people, the half a billion to 1 billion people who've worked so hard and are leading ultra rich lives, they should not worry about the plight of almost 2 billion other people in this world.
Need to follow up, please.
No, I can't entertain that. Speaker Anirudh, you can't ask questions, so you can complete your answer or you can just leave it there.
I'd like to leave it there.
Okay, sure. Arjun, Karthik, your question?
Okay. So you spoke about ripped clothes, living in an underprivileged area, and all that. So I just have a simple question. How will 600 rupees or something similar fix that? Wouldn't you rather have government funds into into developing infrastructure instead of UBI? Why not invest in development of infrastructure?
All right.
For this, I think can I speak?
Yeah, sure.
For this, I could send you a link which says that the plan is about spending around, I think, for a population of 10 people, take a loan in the United States, where, sure, it's a developed country, but there's still quite a bit of poverty. The plan of the government is to spend for like 10 people around 1,000 US dollars. I could send you a link for that if you want. So it's not going to be such a meager money that they really can't do anything with it.
Thank you, Speaker. Aryan Dikshit, you can.
Moderator, can I have a follow-up?
If you feel a follow-up is very relevant, you can send it to me on private chat, but we simply don't have time for follow-up.
All
Aryan,
right. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So my question is that you kept talking about how there's poverty in the world and how we need to educate more people, but isn't that exactly what um, yeah, isn't that exactly what schemes such as the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, etc., are doing already? And by adding the UBI, aren't you just going to be removing all of them and thereby removing all the benefits which you're getting, which you want seen in the world?
Okay.
I didn't understand it. Could you repeat it again?
I think the speaker's question was normally UBI replaces a large amount of welfare schemes. So do you think that that's viable?
Yes, it definitely is.
All right, we can entertain one more question. Mm, Sampada, you can ask your question.
May I ask a
Thank you,
procedural
moderator.
question,
So I
please?
can. Can I
Tejas,
go
were you
ahead?
saying something?
Or
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
May I ask a procedural question? So I just wanted to
Sure.
make sure that all the things I'm texting you on personal chat, they're going to the judges, right?
Ad campaigns to come out of
I'll mark them if they stand and I'll add those points to them. I can't copy paste all of that to the judges.
Okay, but
So
as long as they
I'll,
consider it.
yeah, if it stands, I'll just add the points on to the
Do we
final
send it
points.
to you in personal chat here?
Thank you.
Yes, but only if it's very relevant. Otherwise, I'm just
Yeah,
disregarding
so
it.
on the meeting chat or on WhatsApp?
On the personal chat. Okay. Sampada, you can ask your question.
Yeah, thank you, moderator. So I just want to ask the speaker why the speaker would like to pay the rich under the UBI and why not just target the poor.
Thank you. Speaker, you may answer. Anirudh.
Could you please repeat that? I couldn't get it. Sorry.
Sampada.
Yeah, so I was asking why you think we should pay the rich as well under the UBI and why not just target the poor?
Anirudh.
I don't think I stated that.
Mm, okay, well, move on. Uh, So that concludes the opening statement round of 6 minute, 4 minute questions. Now we're going to have a rebuttal round. Each team, in the same order as you spoke before, is going to get 4 minutes to make a rebuttal statement. We will not have time to be entertaining questions on the rebuttal statement. So, with that, we'll go to Omkar and Sampada. Your 4 minutes start whenever you start speaking.
Thank you, moderator. So, a few points that I found very common among the opposition is that implementation of a UBI will lead to inflation because there will be no increase in supply. Now, please note that giving a UBI, essentially, people have more money to invest into business, people have more money to start business, credit is available and at cheaper rates of interest. So, this ultimately will culminate in the expansion of existing business and the coming up of new businesses which will increase supply. Added to this is the fact that people will be happier, as is seen in empirical data of experiments, thus improving their productivity. And this increase of number of businesses, increase in competition, increase in supply will sufficiently counter the demand and keep a healthy rate of inflation rather than it being too high. Another point I found was that there will be corruption in the provision of UBI. Well, it must be noted that while there is only so much we can do about government corruption, there will be much more corruption in social welfare schemes because there will be intermediary government institutions who will distribute the intentions of the social welfare scheme. And one more side note. One of the opposition speakers gave the analogy of the industrial revolution with respect to how there will be job losses due to artificial intelligence. To him, I would like to point out during the industrial revolution for about a period of 70 years, there were seriously high levels of unemployment. People were struggling to live on. There was great social unrest, and hence the advent of artificial intelligence will necessitate a UBI. Um, yeah, and
Yeah.
for further
So
rebuttals,
yeah, so extending Omkar's argument, another question that was quite evident in most of the speeches was that opposition comes up and talks about how people are going to become lazy and lose the incentive to work. Let me just quickly tackle that. So this is based on the assumption that we work only for survival, right? That's just blatantly false because people just don't like work to earn just to survive. They work to for job satisfaction, to improve their standard of living, and so on and so forth. UBI just pays the minimum costs. Beyond that, you need to be employed to improve your own standard of living and get the things that you really want. Another point was about the whole advantages of targeted schemes. We have a simple analysis for this. The government spends huge sums to identify people, just identify people to whom welfare should be given. For example, the National Sample Survey Organization spends an average of 90 lakhs every year to identify targeted families, to give the kind of schemes that we heard throughout opposition. We think that it's easier to provide the UBI and much more like difficult for people to slip through the gaps of bureaucracy than when you're spending so much time, effort, labor, money, etc., to hone down on people who actually need the UBI. So and as we've already shown you, we had opposition come up and tell us that if one job is lost, another will be created. What we tell you is that these jobs require completely different skill sets to the point at which you need highly specialized labor in the field of things like automation. And the process of gaining an education to be able to do this is going to take time. And in the time duration of which people would require some means to survive. And that's precisely what UBI provides.
Thank you. We're going to move on to the next rebuttal speakers, Arjun Karthik and Mahe Banerjee. 1 second. Are you ready? Arjun Karthik.
I'm just waiting on my teammate.
Sure, I'll.
Yeah, tell me if it's on right now.
One sec, I'm just opening